Many people thought that as I buy this insurance, I can keep it until I'm much older. Now I can't afford it. Insurance company are already making billions of ringgit. Why can't they just help the people a bit more?
One of the big drivers of medical inflation is pharmacy. The hospitals are not regulated for what they can charge.
Hi, welcome back to the studio, and in this episode, we will be talking about the rise of insurance premium. Now, health insurance premium has increased significantly over the past few years. Some has received an increase of up to 70%. Truly, many Malaysians are complaining right now. Now, so today in this studio with us, we have Mark, the CEO of Liam. And I want to start with this question, right? Mark, maybe you can shed some light on this matter, because from what I've read, Malaysia's medical inflation rate is about 15% in 2024. But why Malaysians are actually seeing an insurance premium increase of 70%, and some even complaining that it reaches up to 275%? What's really going on?
First, let me update your viewers. Our actual inflation rate that from our own database of every claim that's been paid in the country for the last 7 years is 16.1% from 2021, 22, and 23.
Wow. So it's not 15. It's higher than that.
It's a little bit higher than that. Now, within those numbers, 60% would have received an increase of less than 20%, and about 9% have received an increase of more than 40%. So those are the ones that are, highlighted, the 70%, and the ones that are, 200 plus percent. I'd really need to know the details in order to try to explain why someone would get such a high increase.
All right. So then the question still remains, right?
Yeah.
How come some people will see such a high increase when the actual medical inflation is not as high?
Right. There's a few reasons. Okay. One is medical insurance premiums are age-based, right? So the older you get, the more expensive your premiums get. And that's because the higher your utilization is. So you can imagine somebody who is my age might use the hospital more than somebody who is your age. So my premium will be higher, right? The real driver for the last few years has been the post-COVID utilization. So during COVID, insurers deferred raising premiums in order to help the rakyat, for obvious reasons, right? And so post-COVID, from 23, 24, and 25, we saw a bit of catch-up of companies raising premiums, plus we saw an unprecedented surge in hospitalizations. It used to be you could go to the bank on that about 10 or 11 out of 100 insureds would need to use the hospital in 1 year, right? But in 2023, we saw that go to 25. Ooh. So there were people who during COVID avoided going to the hospital, right? Unless there was an emergency or something serious. But post-COVID, the rise in utilization has been just something we've never seen before.
Right.
And so those high numbers are a cumulative effect of premium increases from sometimes all the way back to 2020.
Right.
And so it's a bit of a catch-up effect, and that's why we see the numbers look so big.
Right. So based on what you've said just now, it's what we're looking at is a catch-up, number one, and number two also, it's a delayed of treatment that suddenly right after COVID, people start flocking in to have that treatment. Right. But at this rate, because even if you try to catch up with the previous premium, this year we actually still do have some sort of inflation, right? So isn't this gonna keep compounding, and wouldn't it reach a point where health insurance just become unaffordable for Malaysians?
Well, that's the concern, and I think we're starting to see some of that now, especially in two groups. One is the M40, and the other are the retirees. For obvious reasons, they wanted to access private health care, and then they have a limited budget, and retirees, for the same reason, they have a fixed income, and their premiums are much, much higher than say a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old. It's a little bit of a dichotomy. I mean, even though we see a rise in the number of people who are taking out insurance, we also see a rise in people who are making choices whether they need to keep their insurance or not.
Yeah, and from what I've seen is it is really a difficult decision, right? And many people
Yeah.
thought that, as I buy this insurance, I can keep it until I'm much older, and when
Yep.
I really need it at that age, especially at that stage in life, and now I can't afford it, right? And wouldn't insurance company, be kinder to people? Because there's this narrative in the market where people say that insurance company are already making billions of ringgit in revenue, but yet they keep saying they're losing money. How does this make sense, and why can't they just help the people a bit more?
Yeah, that's a common question, and let me share with you what's behind that. First of all, not all insurers are making billions, and some insurers have been around 100 years and have millions of clients, and so you can understand that their businesses are quite big. Secondly, there are different lines of business. There's life, there's critical illness, there's personal accident, there's medical insurance, and the profits that they're making are coming from the non-medical insurance block. The medical insurance block generally is making very little, or in some cases losing money for many insurers. And so the insurers have an obligation that they must maintain, or each block of business has to be sustainable on its own. There's no cross-subsidy between one block of business and another block of business. And so in order to make that sustainable, then they have to look at revising the premiums. Now, what we've seen with the interim measures that were introduced by Bank Negara is we've seen insurance companies agreeing with the central bank to cap premium increases for a 3-year period. Now, that's just a short-term measure because inflation will tick on.
That's right.
And even though the caps may be 10% a year or less, there'll come a time, unless we can come up with the solutions or some mitigating factors that can help bring claims inflation under control, we'll be right back where we started from 3 years down the road.
Right. Now, definitely we'll want to explore the area of solution and what are some of the temporary measures and so on. As Liam CEO, I believe you have quite a lot of insights in that matter. But before we go into that, I would like to dive deeper into this whole problem of health insurance price increase, right? Because as you mentioned, there are multiple different business, and it seems like other parts of the business are making money. It's mainly in the area of health. What do you think is the main issue there? Because when we look at this thing, there are multiple different parties involved, right? Insurance company for one, providing the health insurance. And we can also see that there are doctors, there are hospitals, and there's also policy holder, right? Can you share with us, based on your insight, right? How do you think each of these players come together and kind of contributed to this whole increase in price kind of thing?
Let me just back up just a little bit and just talk about some of the drivers of medical inflation, because I think that's important to address. Number one, there is an economic conflict between the provider and the payer. The provider, the private provider, meaning the hospital, wants to sell or to provide as much services as possible. And their billing is on a fee-for-service basis. So they bill for everything. I mean, they break it down by the item. I mean, every cotton swab, every Panadol.
The tissue, the syringe.
Your nursing charges are daily nursing charges. They charge you to check your blood pressure. They charge you to give you your medicine. Everything is broken down fee-for-service. And so they're trying to make as much revenue and profit as possible, and the insurer or the payer is trying to get an adequate service for their policyholders at a reasonable price.
Right.
And so there becomes this conflict between the provider and the payer.
One wants it to be cheaper. One
wants to sell as many services as possible.
Ultimately, it's a profit organization, right?
Yeah. And this is a big problem, the sort of the continued, corporatization of private hospitals in Malaysia. And this is exactly what happened in the U.S. When I was a kid, I was born in a city hospital that was non-for-profit, right? And I grew up in a community that had a county hospital that was non-for-profit. Now they're all owned by big hospital groups.
Oh.
And, when that happens, things change, right? The priorities change. Profit becomes much, much more important part of the whole equation, and the way the whole
Right.
business is run changes. And that's happening in Malaysia, and it's happening in other countries around the region as well.
Right, right. So, talking about back in the US, right?
Yeah.
Since we're going to dissect into this topic, back then, how much was it when you were born in the local hospital? Do you remember kind of a rough idea?
No, I don't remember, but I remember the first medical insurance policy I bought.
All right.
Yeah, so that would have been 45 years ago.
Oh.
Okay, because I've been in the business for 45 years, and it was $19 a month.
Oh, right.
U.S. So $19 a month U.S.
Okay, okay.
was not a lot of money, right?
Right.
And it was a very rich plan, no deductible, 100% payment, everything,
Okay.
is covered. And now, a family of four would cost of a few tens of thousands of dollars a year.
Tens of thousands?
Yes.
A year?
Yes.
So you're talking about like per person at least 5,000
More than that.
more than that
More than that. Yeah, 5,000 to 10,000
per person for health insurance.
Yeah, per year. Yeah.
Wow.
So
And there's no government hospital, is it? You were mentioning
there's no government hospital, but there's government plans for the low income and for the retirees.
Right.
But the service is delivered from the private sector.
Right. So it's kind of like I give you a medical plan, but
Yep.
you can go to whichever private provider.
Yeah, and I call the rules as the government. I tell you how much I'm going to pay you for this service, for that service. I tell you, what services you could provide, and you can participate or you cannot participate. And most doctors and hospitals participate.
Right. So can you give a rough idea on US? I always hear that in US right now, health insurance is actually unaffordable. They say that in US, one of the main causes of bankruptcy is actually health insurance. Or not health insurance, I mean healthcare costs.
Health costs, right.
Healthcare
Health
costs.
costs, yeah.
And you've seen how that changed over the years,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Can you verify that for me? And also, what's your view on the matter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I said, I think, the hospitals and the providers have become very profit-minded and bottom-line minded over the years. There are small regional groups of hospitals, large regional groups of hospitals around the country. It's all privatized, and but most people during their working careers are covered by group insurance.
Right.
Although group insurance can be expensive as well, because it's just a bit of larger numbers, may be covered under a group. But the employer then would contribute usually a reasonable amount, if not a significant amount,
Yes.
to the premium. It's when you're not covered by a group, when you're self-employed.
That's right.
Or
Yeah,
when
you
you
leave the
reach,
company, you retire.
yeah,
Or,
when you reach retirement age, right. But at least in the U.S. retirement age, they have Medicare, which is the government plan. And there are different tiers of benefits, some of which you pay a premium for, but it's much more modest than the 5,000 or 10,000 that you might pay individually, during your working life.
And from what I've seen, what happened is that because there's a lack of regulation in the US, from what I've observed and watching a few other documentaries about it as well, a simple say antihistamine jab, right,
Yep,
which
yep.
costs about $90
Yep.
in Malaysia.
Yep.
It's about 1,000 USD.
Yep.
That's what I've heard. And did the government do anything to kind of like step in or regulate it or whatnot? Because in my opinion, when I look at the evolution of the US healthcare,
Yeah.
there's some sort of a parallel or similarity in the beginning days, right?
There is, and that's the scary part, right? Because we don't want to go down that path. We don't want to find ourselves 20, 25 years from now in the same boat as the U.S. And yes, the hospitals are not regulated in terms of what they charge, except for the government plans that I mentioned earlier. And it's the same in Malaysia. The hospitals are not regulated for what they can charge. They can charge whatever the market can bear, and they do. One of the big drivers of medical inflation again is pharmacy. Even if you look at the numbers that are put out by APHM, the biggest driver of profitability for private hospitals is pharma. It makes up 48% of the profit of a private hospital.
Right.
And so-
Can you explain more about that? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, they buy drugs at a certain price and then they mark it up. I mean, and there's no rules or regulations on how much they can mark up. You can see from the numbers that half their profit actually comes from pharma.
Right. Okay. This I can share that
Yeah.
the other day I went to a hospital and when I went to the pharmacy, when they gave me the medication, I checked the price and I checked the price of my local pharmacy itself. Even the pharmacist in the hospital kind of hinted that it's going to be way cheaper. And true enough, it's half the price.
Half the price. Wow.
Half the price when I buy it outside.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's 100%.
Not surprised. Not surprised. Right.
And
That's 100%.
48% comes from that.
Yeah, that's APHM's own numbers from their own publication.
Wow. Okay. Now, then here's the next thing, right? You didn't mention that they can charge whatever they want based on how much the market can afford.
Yep.
And we know that this affordability mostly comes from insurance companies.
Yep.
Insurance company knows this, right? And they're all friends. But why don't they speak up about it? Why don't they just refuse to pay or say that like, hey, these too exorbitant, negotiate for a lower price or some sort of things like that? Why is that not happening then?
Well, it's a little complicated. I mean, insurers first of all want to give as much choice to their policyholders as possible. They want to give the best hospitals as choices as well, and those tend to be the more expensive facilities. Insurers do negotiate discounts with hospitals, but discounts don't control inflation.
Right.
They just reduce the price of whatever that price may rise to, right? It's very difficult for an insurer. You have to look at the process. So you get a pre-authorization to go into a hospital. So the insurer agrees to give a guarantee letter for a certain procedure. And that guarantee letter covers a range of costs that were presented by the provider, right?
Right.
And then they go through the procedure, and if everything goes smoothly, then you go to discharge. And so the discharge is happening. The patient is waiting on the insurance company to approve the bill. And this is in real time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no time for real
Go home first,
haggling.
wait. You gotta wait there, right?
Yeah.
Until it's approved.
Yeah. So you're waiting there. Also, the doctor's busy. The hospital takes time to get the itemized bill ready. And so insurers are under pressure to approve bills quickly. Now, there is some haggling that might go on afterwards if there's something serious.
Right.
But generally, they have agreed to the pricing beforehand at the discounts that they've negotiated. And it's also very difficult to challenge a physician about the treatment that's been given and what's been medically necessary or not medically necessary, because one doctor, one patient, the insurance company is generally not a doctor, is not on the scene, is not there to make the decisions, and it's very difficult to challenge the decisions that went on between the doctor and the patient.
Right. I can understand the complication there, right? I mean, maybe the person is on the operating theater, and you can't really argue with them and say, how come you're using so many packets of gauze? Right? Hey, there's blood,
You cannot.
right?
You cannot.
Yeah, and then hey, how come I did this?
Yeah.
You can't really open up the guy again and verify whether did that happen as well, right?
Exactly.
So it's pretty complicated in that sense.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, there's one more thing as well that I thought it's good to mention, because very often when we looked at this whole scenario of hospital charges or this thing here, sometimes we talk about physician.
Yeah.
From the narrative of the market, from what I've seen, some people think that doctors are also overcharging for consultation and so on, because there's this discrepancy between bill when it's insurance paid and self-paying, right? Very often self-paying is cheaper. So when this went out, I have a couple of doctors friends who actually reached out to me, and they told me that, look, based on my standard price, per consultation is actually $285, and that's the government-approved standard price. The only thing is, when you come as a self-paying patient, I give you a discount.
Yep.
So it's not I'm overcharging you for insurance. I actually gave you a discount. And now you guys are complaining about it. And you guys seem like an ungrateful bunch, right? Yeah, so, and that was what they were telling me about. And I just feel so bad for these doctors sometimes. But they did acknowledge that there are some bad apples. Which here I want to hear your opinion, right? Do you think that sometimes because the cost is so controlled and it hasn't increased since the past
13 years.
13 years, right?
Yeah.
And there's this thing in the market that they were saying that your haircut is more expensive than the doctor's fee at this point, right? Unless they do a procedure or whatnot, the consultation fee, a hairdresser actually earns more. Now, do you think that sometimes because of this lack of adjustment over the past 13 years also kind of create some sort of a trouble for the doctor where I've witnessed certain cases where when the doctor sticks in that scope into the nose and he just sticks in a little bit further to your throat and he charges it as two procedures, it's scope for nose, scope for throat. And his argument will be, because over the past 13 years, there was no increase in price. And I gotta find my way to increase the price then. Right? So I just stick it a little bit further. Now it's two scopes. Right? So what are your thoughts about this whole scenario for the doctor side before we go on talking
Well,
about
first of all, there are many techniques that if a doctor wants to deploy in order to try to maximize his fees, right? Especially dealing with an insurance company. But you're right. I mean, most times, most of the stories that I hear are not that there's two sets of pricing, but that a cash-paying patient is often given a discount, which you could say is fair or not fair, right? I mean,
in this case, I'd rather be not fair.
If
not, we won't get the discount.
Right.
The inflation will be worse, right?
Right. But the problem with medical cost inflation is not really with the physician. It's really with the hospital charges. And it's with the consumables. What they call hospital surgical and supplies, the nursing charges, all the pharma, all the other consumables that are used either in the operating theater or in the hospital room. So yes, the doctors and some of the doctors are rightly underpaid. I mean, if you just look at a GP, it's still 35 ringgit. I mean, that's where your haircut comes in. It's really 35 ringgit to go to a GP, and that's why they have to sell. They have to prescribe medication out of their office.
Mark up a little bit more. Right?
And you can understand that. I mean, so there has to be a little bit of writing of some of these fee schedule. But most of the medical inflation that we get is not coming from doctors' fees. It's coming from hospital charges.
So it seems like there's this whole issue about profitability at play, the different interests of different parties that's a little bit misaligned at this point, right?
There is.
There's definitely this thing that people will say as well, right? Especially in the hospital operators, which is the Malaysia public hospitals lack the capacity to support the current healthcare. And that's why there's more and more private hospitals coming around. Right? And you will only be motivated to operate a private hospital if I'm allowed to make profit. And if you cap me from making this profit, or we're going to delve into this argument longer, if I just stop providing it, it's going to be worse. So what are your thoughts about this whole scenario? Because it's kind of like, you move here, you die. You move here, you die. Either way, it's a problem, right?
Well, I think it's a matter of not a matter of making profit, but a matter of making how much profit. Recent annual reports from some of the big hospital groups show what they call EBITDA, earnings before income tax and depreciation, of margins of 20 to 25%. And that starts to get to me, in the high side. So it's expected that they should make a profit, but it's just what is a reasonable profit?
So the question is how much?
How much? Same with insurers. I mean, insurers should make a reasonable profit, but should not make an exorbitant profit. I mean, because we're really, when you talk about health insurance, you're really crossing into social space.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. There's some sort of a social responsibility there. Right? But I guess at this point right now, when we're talking about the health insurance sector itself, it is actually losing money, right? So not so much of a profit.
Yes, that's very true. No, that's very true. So even small single digits, many companies would be happy compared to the alternative.
I have to be honest, prior to understanding the whole issue, sometimes I really thought that the insurance company is making money. It's just that they refuse to kind of like subsidize or anything like that, right? Or they are just overcharging the policyholders. But after a while, I was like, I, as a businessman as well, I can understand that they are looking at it from a lens of business units, right? And if this business unit is losing money, you can't be penalizing another unit to take care of this.
Yeah, so what would happen is, obviously then, in the end, it comes from the shareholder, right? Because all the units are aggregated together, and then the shareholder's piece is there, right? So now shareholders, like in this interim measure when we're capping premiums, may be able to tolerate, losses for a period of time. But if it's not sustainable, they will get out of that line of business. And if they get out of that line of business, that's when the problems really start. Right. Because what happens is, if I'm an insurer and I'm, have an open block of business, I'm taking in new insureds, and my business is growing, and then I decide to stop, that means I close that block of business. Now, when I close that block of business, I'm not taking in any new insureds. That block of business is going to get nothing but older and less healthier. And usually those people, the unhealthy people, can't move, can't go to another insurer. Yeah. And so, it just worse. Deteriorates year after year after year. And so we don't want to see that happen. We don't want to see companies pulling out of the business. Yeah, and because from what I've seen, that if they were to choose to close the pool, and it becomes a closed pool right now, then it's just going to shrink, and the payout is just going to get worse and worse. That's right. Right? That's right. And it's not healthy for the insurance company as well. That's right. So can we say that it is not to the interest of the insurance company as well to close it? They want to keep it going because by closing it is actually worse. Yes. And on the other hand, there's also the issue about if they were to say that I do not want to provide any more health insurance, then Malaysians will have to go back to depending on government. And then there's this whole issue again, where can our public healthcare support that, and will private hospital come in as well? Now, remember earlier that we talked about this. We also talked about social responsibility part of health as well, right? And you did mention that it's about how much to make. And so what about for insurance company? Is there anything that they can do in terms of, say, overall, maybe I take out 5% of my budget as a CSR, to subsidize this part or whatnot, right? What are your thoughts about that? Is there anything that insurance company can do to help the people at this point? Well, there are very few options, actually. I mean, because as I said before, to come up with, to subsidize financially is not sustainable. It could be something that that could work for the short run, but not for the long run. When premiums go up or when inflation goes up, and we'll always have some form of medical inflation, because there are some drivers that just are with not within our control. Aging population, increasing NCDs, medical advancement, all those things. We don't control those items. Malaysia also has a big problem because a lot of things are imported, and a lot of things are imported in U.S. dollar. And so if the currency weakens, then the cost goes up. And if you go back 13 years ago, I remember this vividly because that's when I bought my last property. The ringgit was at $3.20, and now it's at what, $4.45 or something like that, right? And so that has a direct impact on the cost of supplies and services at the hospitals and equipment that the hospitals have to import. Right. So it wasn't just the increase of medical equipment prices or medical advancement, but it's also the ringgit getting weaker. The ringgit. Yep. That has a direct impact. And if you look at the average depreciation over the last 12 years, aside from a short improvement, right, a small improvement we've seen in the last 12 months, it's been almost 4% depreciation a year.
Wow, and if you're talking about from 340 to 440 now, that's about
Yeah.
30%
Yeah.
increase
Yeah.
alone, right?
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
even if medical advances don't take into account,
Yep.
you are still looking
Yep.
at 30% over the...
You're still looking at a 3 or 4% inflation
Yeah.
rate just from the currency.
Right,
Just from
right.
the currency. And the other thing I'll just point out to your listeners is that insurance companies are not purely innocent in this as well. We've designed products that encourage utilization
Right.
in a quest to come out with greater and better and richer products that
All right.
that are easier to sell, that give our agents stories to say, and it's gravitated to where the average product is first you get a guarantee letter where you don't pay anything when you go into the hospital, right?
Yeah.
You may make a small deposit for incidentals,
Okay,
right?
okay.
And then it's going to cover 100% of the as charged bill.
Right, right.
And so the customer really doesn't pay anything, right?
Yeah.
And so that encourages consumption. And secondly, most plans only cover inpatient, right? There are some outpatient procedures, but I mean, it doesn't cover you to go to the clinic, right?
That's right.
It doesn't cover you to go to the
It
specialist.
doesn't even cover for checkups,
Right,
right?
right,
Diagnosis.
right,
So
right,
sometimes the guy doesn't really want to be admitted.
Right.
But
right. So if I go to the emergency room, which is completely accessible, which is not always the case in many countries, I can just walk right in, right? And if I want the bill paid, I have to be admitted.
that's right. So, I mean, this is the thing, right? Sometimes I notice some people, all they needed was just a diagnosis, maybe an X-ray to confirm that nothing is wrong.
Yeah.
But because it costs, say, $300 for an X-ray,
Yep.
right? And I may not be able to afford it, so why not? I'll just get admitted.
Yep.
And because of that, now my bill is 2,300
Yep.
ringgit.
Yep. Yep.
And
yep.
since I'm doing my
Yep.
X-ray,
Yep.
let's just add a couple more things.
Yep. Yep.
And make it a full-fledged thing,
You got
right?
it. You got it. You got it.
Yeah. I'm just
And
curious,
this
right?
is the fault of the. I mean, this is the insurer's fault.
Why not just provide
This is the
diagnosis
insurance-
as part of
Yeah,
the coverage,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
limit the diagnosis, say 1,000 ringgit,
Yep.
something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, there are more companies coming out with. I wouldn't really say innovative because different countries will cover outpatient as well. But in Malaysia, covering more outpatient consultations.
Right.
But it's still not widespread.
So,
It's still not the common scenario.
okay, and this is a good place to talk about this because I used to be an insurance agent. I recall during my year as an insurance agent, at one point, there were two kinds of product that kind of changed the whole market. And there's the third that will lead me to the next question. But let's talk about these two first. The first one was an unlimited medical plan,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Where I recall it used to be 100,000 a year, and
Yep.
that's considered pretty
Yep.
good. 150,000, wow, pretty damn good at this point,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And suddenly, 1 million.
Yep. Yep.
It just went 10x, right?
Yep, yep.
And everyone just started buying the 1 million plan.
Yep.
And the next thing that happened was, to beat that, the other insurance company came out with
2
1 million with unlimited lifetime.
Yeah.
right? And
yeah.
with no
Yeah.
co-payment whatsoever.
Yeah.
And there was just this period of time of 3-4 years. That was the product in the market. And today, if you go anywhere, you want to buy a first plan, it usually starts at 1.25 to 1.5 million per year. And now as a hospital, charging you 30% more over 10,000 ringgit, it's not that bad, right?
Yeah. I mean, but the reality is that, to go from 1 million doesn't cost much money for the insurance company. The average claim is only about 8,000 ringgit.
So it's merely a marketing
Yeah,
claim, right?
it really is. It
Yeah.
really is.
But this,
But it does give the impression.
that's right.
Yeah.
And there's
yeah.
one part of it that we can't account for,
Yeah.
which is that randomness and that morality, right?
Yeah.
The moral hazard of it,
Yeah.
which leads me to the next part.
Yeah.
There's two products that I've seen
Yeah.
that has stopped because of moral hazard, right? For those of you who do not understand what's moral hazard, basically is the hazard of the user abusing it kind of thing, right?
Yep.
There was one product where it used to be whenever you stay in a hospital, they'll give you an income replacement
Yes.
allowance,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I recall at one point, some agents will bump that number so high where every night you stay in the hospital, you get back, say, 300 to 500 ringgit, and they will get their customers to buy a policy, say 3,000 ringgit, and they tell them every year, just make sure you stay for about 3 nights, so you get a half subsidy.
Yep. I've heard the same thing. I've heard the same thing.
And after a couple of years,
yeah,
the insurance companies decided to stop the product entirely.
Yep.
Right? I mean, it's a genuine product, right? It's a nice product. Then there's the other product that's interesting. At one point, the insurance company that I used to work for actually provided an outpatient medical plan.
Yep.
After 2 years, they have to stop it because people going there to get vitamins, people going there to get all sorts of funny supplements. Doctors will close one eye lah. And anyway, it's 35 bucks to 200 bucks. Yeah. And that just kept going on. And after 2 years, they closed the plan. Just 2 years. Yeah. And so this leads me to the next question, right? We also hear about Bank Negara talks about buffet syndrome. Right? Where consumers just take in whatever it is. And what I thought about this, even if insurance company try to provide diagnosis as part of it as a solution. We try to say that, let's say we make this more accessible so you can go to a more simple one. But there exists such moral hazard with our policyholders. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, there's a few things, and I wanted to relate a story sort of loosely tied to your earlier comments. And this happened to me. This was a few years back when I had arthritis in my thumbs, right? And so I went to a hand specialist who's well known, and I genuinely thought that he was trying to help me out, right? So he said, "Look, I want to give you this treatment." He must have forgot I was a CEO of an insurance company, right? Right. So he says, "I want to give you this treatment called protein-rich plasma, that has shown, to help in your situation, but your insurance company won't pay for it. And so I'm going to charge them 10 times for something they will pay for called hyaluronic acid, and I'm going to give you the protein-rich plasma treatment for free, basically, And of course, my response was, "Never mind. I'll just take care of it myself," right? But I mean, generally, there are these kind of things that go on. But I think people look at the insurance company as this big institution that's making millions of dollars, and it's my right to try to take advantage of getting as much of that as I can. And this leads to the buffet syndrome, where you're paying these premiums and they're getting higher and higher. So the idea of this buffet syndrome is obviously quite simple, right? I mean, when it comes to a restaurant, if you go for a buffet, you pay one price, right? You're
Eat as much as you can.
Eat as much as you can, right? Right.
Eat your money's worth.
Right. When it comes to a medical sense, it's I've paid one premium, and it's not cheap. And so I'm in the hospital now, or I'm going to seek treatment. So I feel entitled to be able to claim as much as I can, and it's understandable. You and I might feel the same way. We pay thousands of dollars of premium, and we're faced with with cost or the opportunity to get something extra or something taken care of, and we take advantage of that.
And this is the hard part of it, because there's not much of policy, or you can't govern this part. You can't tell someone that don't lie, right? You can give an instruction, but it's hard to discover as well.
It is.
Because it gets sensitive, right? For example, whether did I do that protein thing or do the hyaluronic acid thing?
It is
touchy as well.
It is.
Right? Because it has to do with my health.
Right? It is.
Now, having said that, we know that to handle this whole situation, actually Bank Negara came up with this interim measure. Right, in December of 2024, and there's this cap and so on. But there are many complaints in the market where they say that insurance company actually did not provide this. While they say that it's supposed to be 80%, right, are supposed to be exempted from it. Dala, you don't want to subsidize. But I want to clarify that. Actually, on a business standpoint, to cap it and to lose money for a couple of years, it's already a subsidy.
True.
Yeah. True. I mean, in that perspective, because actually I wanted to ask you about it, but after I thought about it, it's already a subsidy, so it's fine. Now the question is how long you want me to subsidize it, right?
Right.
Now, having said that, I digress. Coming back to it is, why does it seem like insurance company are not doing these things?
Yeah.
Why are there
Yeah.
still such complaints?
Yeah, I've heard that as well, and I got to believe that companies are complying, want to comply. But what has happened is the interim measures came out on December 20th, and it takes a little time for companies to just stop what they're doing and start doing something else.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, bills are in the printer, they're in the mail. You know, they're going out, and some people have gotten bills after the interim measures were announced that were already in the process. So I think that companies have gotten the message, and they're reaching out, and the intent is to be fully compliant.
So can I say that if someone gets a letter, it could be a letter that is dated earlier per
Yes.
se,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Now, there's also another question that a lot of people are asking, because sometimes it feels like they have to ask for these things rather than it is automatically given to them.
Yeah.
Should an insurance company just make it an automatic opt-in?
Well, there's some confusion about 2024 because the interim measures came out in December of 2024, right? But it applied to rate increases of 2024. So there was some confusion as to whether companies would respond to requests or the companies have to reach out. You know, after digging into what the interim measures are, companies must reach out to their policyholders. They must avail the same caps or subsidies to those in 2024 that they would going forward in 2025 and 2026. So there may be a little bit of catch-up. There may have been a little bit of misunderstanding in the beginning, but we believe that that's been rectified.
Right. And what about the other part, right? I heard that Bank Negara did mention as well, for those who feel that they can't afford the premium,
Yes.
even after the adjustment, they are supposed to be provided with another alternative product
Yep.
without any more
Yep.
underwriting, but just
Yep.
transfer over.
Yep.
But so far, I've not met anyone who told me that they were presented such an option.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any particular reason?
Well, the options are just coming out now, and the interim measures spell out that the options have to be available by the end of 2025.
Right.
So some of the companies are only now coming out with options. And so, you know, they're a little bit behind the curve, you know, in trying to meet the demand for what those options would be.
Right. So what about those people who can't afford to pay the premium,
Yep.
but the options are not available yet?
Yep.
I mean, we can say that I can understand being a big company, coming up with a new product, it's not something you can pull out of the thin air, right?
Yep.
It takes a team of people,
Yep.
communicating, planning. So I'm not surprised it's going to take a couple of months. But for someone out there who can't afford to pay his medical insurance premium right now, and is probably going to go lapse in next month, but there's no option. So is there anything that they can do about that?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things, and neither of them are perfect solutions. But number one, they can approach their insurer, and their insurer is supposed to, on a case-by-case, trying to assist the policyholder in those circumstances. Secondly, if I lapse my policy because I couldn't afford it, eligible to reinstate it with no underwriting. And eligible to reinstate it at the reduced increase that has been capped at no more than 10% for the next 3 years.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're not perfect solutions, but those are what we're trying to deal with right now.
I see. So if, let's say, my policy lapsed yesterday and I'm still trying to work out something in the insurance company and I got admitted into hospital just today itself.
I mean, I have to be honest, that could be a complication, yes.
Right, because
Yes.
I wouldn't get a guarantee letter.
You'd have to have conversations with your insurer. Yeah, yeah, that would be a complication.
That would be something that.
Yeah.
So as a Liam CEO, right? I understand that you are supporting a couple of things as well that's proposed. But before we go into that, is there anything that you will kind of recommend or you wish your fellow insurers can do about?
We've just finished talking about that, right? We need more options. We need more plans. We need more plans that also don't encourage consumption, that encourage, what's necessary. There's every plan that's out there has a clause that says that the insurance company will pay the usual, reasonable, and customary fee
Yes.
for service, but there's no authority for you what is usual, reasonable, and customary. And so it's really open to every insurer to negotiate with the hospital, and that basically leaves it the leverage only with the large insurers. You know, there's 47 companies that write medical insurance in Malaysia, and there's 3 of them that have 60% market share.
Right.
And so there are a lot of smaller companies that don't have much leverage. I don't know if that answers the question fully, but
I think that's a complicated thing. Maybe we can just make it more simple for the audience to
Okay.
kind of get the essence of it.
Yep.
Right. Is there anything that other than
what can insurers do, right?
Yeah.
What can insurers do? Well, I mean, I think there's a need for more outpatient coverage.
Okay.
There's a need to cover, you know, to not to force an insured person to have to be admitted to get a bill covered, right? I mean, that just leads to unnecessary consumption, right? Right.
I guess in this case here, basically as an insurance company, it's time to kind of innovate the product design to...
Yeah, and we have companies trying to do that. We have companies trying to curate the journey where they will charge less premium, but they'll ask you to see a GP first. And they'll ask you to get a referral from a GP to a specialist instead of going directly to the specialist. And this is very common in other jurisdictions as well. Malaysia, part of our problem is that Malaysia has very easy access to specialists.
Right.
I mean, you and I could call today and get an appointment next week for almost any specialist that we want to see.
Yeah.
And in many jurisdictions, you can't do that. Now, that's not consumer friendly always, right? Because it puts barriers to access. But there are a lot of treatments that can be handled at the GP level.
Right.
And so more outpatient coverage would help in that way.
Right. So it looks like ultimately there's still no perfect solutions,
No,
right? Because
no.
every party gotta be working in a certain way that we want them to, which is impossible.
The other thing too, which is really a mindset change, right, is copay. Okay, and it's very controversial. There are some people that think that it's not fair, but it really, if you look at the concept of insurance, insurance is meant to cover things that you cannot afford to pay yourself, right? Now, if I'm paying a few thousand ringgit a year for a medical plan, it might not be unreasonable for me to expect to pay a $500 deductible. Or it might not be unreasonable for me to expect to pay 5% of the first 10,000 of the bill. Now, just by doing that, it may cause many policyholders to become more conscious consumers. And this goes hand in hand with our intention to publish the cost of common procedures across all private hospitals, so that the consuming public can understand the differences in cost between providers,
Right.
and they can make better informed decisions.
Yeah, and that's something that's non-transparent as
It's
well.
not,
at this
it's
point,
not,
right?
it's not.
There's no such thing as a centralized data to say that which hospital has the usual
There's
charges
none.
for such a thing.
There's none.
Every doctor, every clinic, every hospital has its own different set of charges.
Yep.
Yeah, and that makes it hard to kind of regulate the whole thing as well, or to create this benchmark for consumers to be more informed.
Yeah.
Right?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
It does. Now, we're in favor of. You talked about some of the things that you alluded to things that we were in favor of. One of the things is called diagnostic related group pricing.
Yeah. Tell us more about it, because
Yeah.
I've been hearing that Bank Negara is trying to push for this thing called diagnostic related grouping, right?
Yep. Yep.
Different parties have different opinion, but
Yep.
I understand that Liam's position is that you guys are in support. Can you share with us why is that so?
Yeah, because it changes the playing field. Okay, it changes the playing field. So now you have fee for service, and fee for service is, I give you the cotton swab, you pay for the cotton swab. I give you the medicine, you pay for the medicine, right? And it all adds up. I mean, it was reported, there was an article 8-9 months ago. I had a one-night stay in a hospital, and there were 95 line items. 95 line items on my bill, right? And so diagnostic-related group pricing is, in simple terms, package pricing. So, but it's complex package pricing because every provider and every patient has different circumstances. They could have comorbidities, they could have complexities. Hospitals have, some hospitals are not-for-profit, some are in the city, some are in the country, some are teaching hospitals, et cetera, et cetera. So there are different circumstances, but basically what it is to come up with one price to pay for a certain procedure that fits the circumstance of that procedure.
Right.
And that for the hospital to make do with that price and to be efficient in what they do. If they're going to make a profit, then they have to deliver that service for that price or less. And that changes the whole dynamics, right? From I charge as much as as I can or as the market will bear, to I get a fixed fee and I have to make do with this fixed fee. And the way I make money is by spending less than the fixed fee for this patient.
Right. Yeah, because I recall, so my son fell, bumped his head, had to do a suture, right? Went to a GA because a 3-year-old baby. Subsequently, I think a year back, my nephew had the same incident, fell, cut his head, went Puchong, sent him to a hospital.
Yeah.
Similar cut.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yep.
Same procedure.
Yep.
And 2 doctors. Right? Including the anesthetist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And this other one is 2 doctors, but I'm not sure. But I know that the suture was conducted by a plastic surgeon because they want it to be known.
It's on the face, right.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that for the same procedure, totally different price. The method of treatment I can understand. Yeah, everyone got their different way of interpreting it, different skill set at the point. But it's quite scary, right?
Yeah. It is. And DRGs are very common around other jurisdictions. They're not easy to do. It takes several years in order to really get it established in a market. And even then, there are outliers that don't fit the DRG model.
That's right.
There are. There are going to be complications and situations that just don't fit neatly into the model, even though there are thousands of DRGs. But it is one way, and it's not a silver bullet, but it is one way that will help move the thinking from charging as much to being more efficient with what I'm receiving.
Yeah, this will force the players to kind of evolve the way they do things, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but from what I've heard also, there are quite some parties who are actually against it, opposed to it.
Yep.
And one of the reasons that they're named is this kind of limits the talent retention kind of thing. Because what happened is that if a hospital has to implement this DRG, then you got to find a balance, because as service, as a thing, what happened is that there is this ability to create space where the doctor's charges are as is, right? So if you want to give a discount, it's your problem. You don't want to give a discount, it's your problem as well, right? Because I can charge whatever I want on the other end of it. But once you have a DRG, now the hospital will have to negotiate with the doctor as well to increase their prices or to maintain that margin. And doctors will feel unfair because they are already squeezed with 13 years of no increase in treatment. And now it becomes a little bit messy, right? Yeah, so, and this will cause doctors to perhaps say that I'll rather leave Malaysia or something like that. What ensues further is hospitals may say that, hey, I'd rather not do so much. Yep. So what are your thoughts about this? Like, is there any other ways to kind of handle this, or...
Well, I think, first of all, to come up with the DRG, you have to know all the inputs that go into it, right? And so it's not just pulled out of thin air, or it's not just a pure negotiation. There has to be a lot of information that is available so that DRG is rightly set, right? I've heard that same argument that you've just articulated, and I don't honestly think that we're going to see droves of doctors who will suffer under the DRG system.
Right.
I just don't see it. I don't think that's materialized in other markets. Not to say that it wouldn't happen in isolated cases, but we don't have overriding concerns that that's going to be a major issue.
So far, based on the sample size of other countries who implemented it, there's kind of not that big an issue.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah, that's what I believe.
yeah, we just will not know whether it's an outlier or something like that. Okay, so because of that, Liam's stance is maybe this could be the best way to do.
Yeah, we think so.
Forward.
We think it's an improvement. We think it's a big improvement.
Right. Now, last but not least, there was also this thing that here Bank Negara was talking about is not-for-profit hospital.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is there such thing?
There is. But these not-for-profit hospitals often come from religious organizations.
Yeah, because
right.
I did hear from the doctors who work there. They told me during their interview itself, the director of the hospital would tell them, if your goal is to be rich, you're not going to be happy here. But they still make a decent profit.
Yep.
So
yep.
when they say not for profit, I was just thinking to myself, right? Like I can't name one as well.
Yeah.
So-
I don't think there are that many, but there are not-for-profit hospitals, and I think that again these are maybe a community hospital or religious organization that have maybe years ago started a hospital, and they still exist.
Right.
They still exist.
Yeah. So I guess this one is a little bit tricky because there's less control over it, right? While government can say that we encourage the building of it, but you got to find someone who wants to build it to start with.
Yeah, true. Well, different shareholders certainly have different philosophies, right, about what they expect as their shareholder.
All right. At the end of the day, this whole topic is really a very complicated one because every player is involved, and it seems like there's just not going to be a silver bullet. Maybe let's just end it with this, right? For yourself, if you have this magic wand in your hand, just by swinging it, you can make one change, and you think this could possibly make a better healthcare system or deal with this issue right now. What would it be?
Well, there might be a couple of things. One, I think we've talked about before, and I think that's the DRG. I think DRG would be a very favorable development in Malaysia. The other thing is drug price controls. You know, I know it's also very controversial, and the pharmaceutical companies are, obviously dead set against it. They're very powerful, and hospitals would not be in favor of that. But the numbers speak for themselves when they make the margins that they make from pharma, drug price controls, and it's been done in other markets, right?
Oh yeah.
Many other markets, drug price controls can work. So those are two things that come to my mind.
Right. I guess the last thing that definitely it's more relevant to our consumers immediately is if anyone out there is struggling right now to deal with their insurance policies, it can be an array of different situations.
Yep.
Just like we talked about just now, whether is it they can't pay and they're admitted in the near future when they're negotiating. What would we say is the first thing that every policyholder should do right now if they are just unsatisfied with what's happening?
Yep.
They just find that it's really difficult. Like, what's the first thing that they should be doing?
Well, they really need to contact their insurer, and insurers have an obligation to reach out to engage with their policyholders who are having difficulty, to try to work out solutions that can help that policyholder for whatever that might be. Maybe there is plan changes, maybe there is other short-term solutions, but they really have little choice but but to reach out to your insurer.
Maybe at this time right now, what I can also tell the audience is this, right? I think the truth is now we're a little bit in that crisis mode kind of thing, right? At least in the communication side. If you're just waiting for the insurance company to do something about it and give you that proper update regularly kind of stuff, it's going to take a little bit of time because after all, it's a big organization. So I think the best way to go forward is just give your insurance company a call, tell them your problem, and move on from there, right? I'm pretty sure that the communication from Bank Negara right now is very clear
Very clear.
If someone approaches and asks for help, you have to do something,
That's right. That's right.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Mark, really lovely to have you here. Thank you for answering all the questions. Is there any last things that you want to share before making a move?
No, I mean, except access to private health care is important. I mean, when you talk about health insurance premiums, you can easily substitute the word premiums for the cost of health care. If the cost of health care keeps going up and premiums keep going up, also private health care will become unaffordable.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would just say is that we really need to improve the public delivery of healthcare. Because Malaysia years and years ago was thought of as a beacon, as a shining example of universal healthcare, and their funding is from general revenue, right? And I know that it's difficult because every year the rising costs of running the public health system outpaces the increase of general revenue. Yeah. And so after a couple of decades of being underfunded, then you find yourself in the difficult position that we are now. The white paper's been done. There haven't been a lot of talk about the white paper specifically, but I hope the government follows through on the white paper because there's a lot of good things in there.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any way that we can download that white paper as well?
You can. I think it's public.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Okay.
Looking forward to see you again.
Okay. Thank you.